The first thing that hit him wasn't the women. It was the paper. The deed lay on the counter like a quiet accusation, its ink too dark, its weight wrong for something that was supposed to promise a future. He had crossed 3 counties, slept in dust and half-dried sweat, buried a horse 2 days back, all for this moment. Land. Something solid. Something that didn't leave. His fingers closed around the document, and that was when his eyes caught the line that made his breath stall. Not the acreage, not the boundaries. The last clause, included with property, 3 adult females. No surnames, no explanation, just words, written neat, like they belonged there. The narrator slows here, because this is where a man decides whether he believes the world still makes sense. The clerk behind the counter didn't look up. He had the posture of someone who had already learned when silence paid better than questions. The cowboy, new boots scuffed, coat faded at the elbows, cleared his throat once, then stopped. He'd learned long ago that the wrong question could cost you teeth, blood, or worse. So he folded the deed, slid it into his coat, and turned. That was when he saw them. They stood near the far wall of the office, not together exactly, but close enough to look like a unit when danger passed through. Dresses plain, sleeves rolled as if work was expected of them anywhere they landed. Their eyes tracked him the way animals track a shadow, quiet, ready, measuring distance. The youngest couldn't have been more than her early 20s. She kept her hands clasped tight, knuckles pale. The oldest held herself stiff, chin high, as if pride were the last thing no one had managed to take. The third woman stood between them, close enough to hear his breathing, far enough to run if she had to. He tipped his hat without meaning to. Habit. Courtesy drilled in before the world taught him better. The women didn't return it. The office smelled of ink, sweat, and old wood soaked in other people's decisions. Outside, a wagon rattled past, wheels complaining. Life going on like nothing strange was happening at all. The middle woman spoke. Her voice was steady, but there was a crack underneath it, like ice stretched thin over water. We expect sex, not questions. She said it like a rule she had memorized too many times. Like something said to survive, not to invite. The youngest flinched when the words landed. The oldest didn't blink. He felt his jaw tighten, not in anger, in something older. He had heard men talk like that before, about what they owned, what came with the price. He had grown up learning how to disappear when those conversations started. His hand rested near the grip of his gun, not because he planned to use it, but because it was the only familiar weight in a room that had suddenly tilted. He looked at them again. Really looked. He noticed the dirt under their nails, the way the third woman's eyes never stayed still, how the oldest kept herself between the others and the door without seeming to. These weren't women waiting to be chosen. They were women braced for damage. "I bought land," he said finally. His voice surprised even him. Low, careful. "I didn't buy people." The clerk coughed behind him. A warning sound. The middle woman's mouth tightened, just a fraction. "What doesn't change how this works," she replied. "It never does." That was the moment fear slid in, quiet and sharp. Not his fear, hers. The narrator lingers here because this is where her story really starts. She watched his shoulders, the way men's shoulders always told the truth before their mouths did. She watched for the shift, the anger, the grin. She had already decided how to survive if he reached for her. She had already told herself not to cry. He didn't move. Instead, he nodded once, like he was agreeing to something no one else could hear. "We'll ride out," he said. "Before dark." The clerk slid a key across the counter. No one smiled. They stepped into the street together, and the town seemed to notice all at once. Heads turned. A man leaned against a post and laughed under his breath. Someone spat into the dirt, and the cowboy felt the weight of eyes on his back, felt himself being measured against old expectations. He had been called many things in his life. Owner wasn't one he wanted. They rode because there was no wagon left for them, and because walking would have taken too long. He gave the women the horses that were easier to handle, took the stubborn one himself. He didn't help them mount unless they asked. They didn't. Pride can be a kind of armor. As the town fell away, dust rose and settled into the folds of their clothes. The land stretched wide and empty, the kind of quiet that made a person's thoughts loud. No one spoke. He listened to the sound of hooves, to the small hitch in the youngest woman's breathing. He wondered what kind of man the town expected him to be by nightfall. The ranch came into view late in the afternoon, and 2 barns leaning like tired men, a house with a porch that had seen better days. He dismounted first, tying off his horse, then stepped back. "Rooms are separate," he said, like he was talking about weather. "Doors stay shut. Work gets done. No one owes anything else." The oldest woman stared at him. "Men don't make rules like that," she said. "I do," he replied. Night came slow. They ate beans and bread in silence. The women waited for the moment the rules would break. It didn't come. He slept on the porch, hat over his eyes, gun within reach, but untouched. Inside, the third woman lay awake, listening to the boards creak, heart pounding at every sound that didn't arrive. She had been sure he would kill her, or worse, use her until there was nothing left. Instead, he left space. And space, she was learning, could be more frightening than force. Before the story goes any further, let me ask you this. If you were standing where she stood that first night, would you believe him? Or would you wait for the truth to show its teeth? Morning didn't arrive with mercy. It came with the scrape of boots on wood and the smell of coffee burned just a little too long. The cowboy was already awake when the women stepped onto the porch one by one, careful not to crowd each other, careful not to assume safety too early. He poured water at the pump, sleeves rolled, movements plain and unshowy. The youngest watched his hands, expecting a grab that never came. The oldest watched his eyes, waiting for a look that didn't arrive. The third woman, she watched the space he left between them as if it were something alive. Work filled the day because work always did. A fence posts needed straightening. A trough leaked. The well groaned like it remembered better years. He spoke only when necessary, his words short, useful. He asked for help the way a man asks the weather, without ownership, without demand. When the sun leaned hard, they rested. When it cooled, they worked again. Dust coated everything, turning skin the same color, erasing differences the town had insisted on. By evening, their shoulders ached in the same places. Shared labor has a way of rearranging power without announcing itself. Still, trust didn't come. It waited. It watched. That night, the women whispered behind a closed door. The youngest asked how long they thought it would last. The oldest said nothing ever lasted. The third woman listened, counting the seconds between the creak of boards outside. She had learned the hard way that quiet could be a trap. She slept in pieces. Days stacked on top of each other, ordinary and tense. He repaired what could be repaired. He paid them wages, small, fair, regular, placing coins on the table and stepping back as if afraid to stand too close. The youngest stared at the money like it might disappear if she touched it. The oldest tucked it away without comment. The third woman asked him once, softly, why he was doing it this way. He didn't answer right away. Then, because it's the only way I know how to keep my hands clean. She didn't know what that meant, but she felt the weight of it. People who talked about keeping clean usually had a lot they were trying to scrub away. The town tested him soon enough. A neighbor rode in one afternoon, drunk and loud, laughing about property and what came with it. He leaned against the fence, eyes roaming, saying things that had no right to be said out loud. The women froze the way they always had. The cowboy stepped forward, slow, deliberate, placing himself between words and flesh. He told the man to leave. The man didn't. What followed wasn't quick or clean. There were fists and dust, and the sound of bone meeting bone. The cowboy took more hits than he gave. When it was over, he stood bleeding, breathing hard, still between the women and the threat. The neighbor rode off cursing, pride dented but alive. The turning point lives here. Not in the violence, but in what came after. The women didn't rush to him. They didn't thank him. They watched, stunned, as he washed blood from his face at the pump, hands shaking now, finally. The youngest cried without sound. The oldest let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The third woman stepped forward, close enough to see his eyes up close, tired, steady, afraid of what he might become if he let go. That night, she brought him a clean cloth. He took it without touching her fingers. "You didn't have to," she said. "I did," he replied. "For me." That answer stayed with her longer than any promise ever had. Weeks passed. The ranch changed shape under their hands. So did the silence. It softened. Laughter slipped out once, surprising all of them. The youngest sang while she worked. The oldest corrected the fence lines like she'd always belonged there. And the third woman, she began to ask questions, small ones at first, where he learned to ride, why he slept on the porch, what he was afraid of. And he answered some. Not all. One evening, by the well, she told him the truth she'd never said out loud. She told him she had been sure he would kill her that first day, or use her until she forgot her own name. She said it without accusation, just fact. He listened like a man who knew how to hold heavy things. When she finished, he nodded once. "I was scared too," he said. "Scared I'd become what everyone expects when they stop seeing you as human." The space between them felt different then, not smaller, clearer. Before we go further, I want to ask you, if you were watching this unfold, would you believe the change was real? Or would you still be waiting for the moment it all fell apart? Trust didn't arrive all at once. It came the way the land did after rain, slow, quiet. This almost unnoticed until one day you realized things were growing where nothing had before. The narrator lingers here because this is where fear began to loosen its grip. Not because danger disappeared, but because choice finally entered the room. Mornings settled into rhythm. Coffee on the stove, boots by the door. The women moved through the house without flinching now, though old habits still tugged at their shoulders. He noticed everything and pretended not to, giving dignity the way some men give orders. The third woman found herself lingering near him more often, not out of duty, but curiosity. She watched how he handled the horses, firm but patient, how he spoke to strangers without puffing himself up, how he never once reminded them of what the town believed they were. She told herself not to mistake decency for safety, or she told herself survival required distance. Still, one evening, as they patched a tear in the roof together, she laughed. It startled her more than it did him. The oldest woman noticed first. She had lived long enough to recognize when a line was shifting. One night, she sat across from him at the table and said plainly, "You don't owe us anything anymore." He met her eyes. "Neither do you." That was the moment plans began to form. The women talked about leaving, about places where their names might matter more than their past. He helped without comment, wrote letters, counted wages, fixed a wheel on the wagon that would carry them away. Letting go, it turned out, was harder than holding on. The youngest left first. She hugged the third woman tight, whispered something about remembering mornings without fear. The oldest followed a week later, tipping her hat to him with a look that said more than thanks. When the dust settled, there were two people left standing in a yard that suddenly felt too big. Silence returned, but it was a different kind. One evening, by the well, the third woman spoke before courage could leave her. She said she had never been asked what she wanted before. He nodded, listening. She said she didn't know if she wanted to leave. He didn't reach for her. He didn't tell her to stay. He asked the question that changed everything. "What would make you feel free?" She thought about it for a long time. Freedom, she realized, wasn't distance. It was being seen without being claimed. "Choice," she said finally. Days passed. Then one morning, he asked her to walk the fence line with him. Oh, they stood looking out over land that no longer felt like a trap. He spoke slowly, careful not to break what they'd built. He said he wasn't asking her to stay because he owned the land. He was asking because he wanted a life that felt earned, not taken. He said if she said no, he would help her leave by sundown. Her heart pounded the way it had that first day, but this time, it wasn't fear driving it. She remembered the night she'd waited for harm that never came, the way he'd stood bleeding between her and a gun, the way he'd never once told her what she was. She said yes, not because she had to, but because she chose to. They married quiet, no crowd, no speeches, borrowed rings, vows spoken low, meant to be kept. Husband and wife not as a reward for suffering, but as proof it didn't get the last word. And the narrator softens here because this ending isn't loud, it's steady. Years later, the ranch held more than land. It held mornings without fear, questions asked without punishment, and a love built from restraint instead of demand. Now let me ask you, how would you have felt in her place? Would you have believed choice could come after control? And if you were him, would you have risked being different when the world expected the same old ending? Thanks for staying to the end. Where are you watching from?